How is it possible that Jesus was born under the reign of Herod, who died 4 years before the Common Era and simultaneously during the census of Quirinius, which imperial records confirm took place 10 years after that death? Why does Matthew report an urgent and desperate flight to Egypt, while Luke guarantees that the family returned peacefully to Nazareth just 40 days after the birth? These chronological failures cease to be religious details when subjected to pure data verification. When we input the 4 Gospels into the artificial intelligence axiom, seeking linear and geographical coherence, its processing did not result in a unified story, but in a critical incompatibility alert. Logical analysis points out that the narratives of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John operate as competing codes that, when forced together, collapse the history's own timeline. We now initiate the canon protocol to expose the structural fractures that transform humanity's most famous night into a puzzle that, rationally, is impossible to assemble. There are 4 main sources, 4 distinct data files. Most scholars agree they were written in different eras for different audiences and with different objectives. They reveal themselves to be more than 4 perspectives on the same event. They function as 4 distinct programs. And the first line of code, the fundamental function to legitimize a Messiah, is his lineage. To be the King of the Jews, he needed to be a direct descendant of King David. This becomes a fundamental system requirement, something non-negotiable. Both Matthew and Luke understand this, and both provide a detailed genealogy. And right at this point, the story already presents its first major inconsistency. Axiom cross-reference the 2 family trees for comparison. The Gospel of Matthew begins its count from Abraham, tracing the lineage through David's son, the famous King Solomon. His list presents 42 generations leading up to Jesus, where each name functions as a link in the golden chain of royal power. Now we open Luke's file. He takes the reverse path from Jesus back to Adam, but the section that interests us is the same, from David to Joseph, the husband of Mary. And what do we see? Luke traces the lineage through another son of David, a man named Nathan, who is practically unknown. From that point on, the 2 lists separate and never meet again. The 2 paths simply do not lead to the same place. They are 2 completely different roads, with destinations that never intersect. The names do not match. The number of generations does not match. Matthew counts 28 generations from David to Jesus. Luke counts 43. A difference of 15 generations. We are talking about something much larger than a simple rounding error or a mistake by those copying the texts. These are 2 family histories that cannot coexist. Axiom performed the correlation analysis. The result shows that there is no correspondence, 0%, in the crucial section between David and Joseph. Axiom's analysis signaled that the 2 versions cannot exist at the same time. For 2,000 years, theologians have tried to create explanations, saying that one lineage belongs to Joseph and the other to Mary. But the texts are clear. Both Gospels state that the 2 genealogies belong to Joseph. This is the first crack in the monument of the canon, and it is so deep that it places everything else in doubt. If the 2 authors could not agree on a fact as basic and verifiable as the hero's lineage, how can we trust them to describe miraculous and supernatural events? This doubt hangs over us and pushes us toward the next inconsistency, the circumstances of the birth. Every child knows that Jesus was born in Bethlehem because his parents went there for a population census. This version is engraved in our culture. The problem is that it only exists in one of the 4 files in the Gospel of Luke. According to Luke, Mary and Joseph live in Nazareth, in Galilee. But a decree from the Emperor Caesar Augustus orders a census across the entire earth, and everyone must register in their city of origin. Since Joseph was of the house and lineage of David, he travels to the city of David, called Bethlehem. Mary, pregnant, goes with him. It is a long and difficult journey, about 150 kilometers over rough terrain. Arriving in Bethlehem because there was no room in the inn, Mary gives birth to her son, wraps him in cloths, and places him in a manger. The story is touching, it seems coherent. But for a moment, erase this scene from your memory. When accessing Matthew's records, the scenario changes. In Matthew's world, there is no census at all. There is no journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem, and the reason is simple. According to Matthew, Mary and Joseph already live in Bethlehem. It is their home. In his gospel, the Magi from the east arrive in Jerusalem and ask King Herod where the newborn king of the Jews is. Herod consults the scribes, who cite the prophecy, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler." The Magi go to Bethlehem and find the star stopped over the house where the child was. The crucial detail is that the text speaks of a house and not a stable or a cave. After this, an angel warns Joseph in a dream to flee with the family, but not back to Nazareth. The order is to flee to Egypt, to escape Herod's fury. Only after the king's death, several years later, do they return. But afraid of the new ruler, Herod's son, they do not dare go back to their home in Judea. Instead, they withdraw to Galilee and settle in a city called Nazareth. The impact of this information demands a moment of silence. These are two completely different stories. In one, a family from Nazareth makes a temporary trip to Bethlehem and returns home. In the other, a family from Bethlehem becomes political refugees, flees to Egypt, and years later settles in Nazareth as a new safe haven. Axiom's simulation is conclusive. The two sequences of events cannot exist in the same reality. Either one is right or the other is. Or both are literary fictions, created to place the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem and fulfill ancient prophecies. If you accept Luke's version, you must reject Matthew's story about the Magi and the flight to Egypt. If you accept Matthew's, you must admit that the census and the trip to Bethlehem never happened. With this, the canon already seems to be in ruins, and our analysis has barely begun. The foundation of the monument is cracked, but the contradictions deepen when we analyze the witnesses to the event. Who were the first to see the newborn Messiah? The answer to this question not only exposes another flaw in the code, but reveals the true objectives of the programmers. In Luke's version, the first witnesses are local shepherds, simple, poor men who were keeping watch over their flocks in the field. It is to them that an angel appears, bringing the good news, followed by a heavenly army singing glories to God. The shepherds run to Bethlehem and find the baby lying in the manger. It is the image of a popular democratic miracle. The message of salvation arrives first to the humblest, a powerful ideological code calculated to resonate with a specific audience. Returning to Matthew's data, the scene transforms again. Where are the shepherds in his narrative? They do not exist. No mention, no angel in the fields, no heavenly choir. In their place, Matthew introduces completely different characters, Magi coming from the east. They are not poor Jews, but wealthy and noble foreigners. Wise men, astrologers, perhaps even kings. They are not guided by the word of an angel, but by a cosmic sign, a star. They do not bring simple astonishment, but expensive gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, offerings worthy of a king. It is a totally different scene with a distinct scale and meaning. The image that forms is that of a king of the universe, not just a messiah of the people, whose birth is noticed by the wise men of other nations and recognized by a celestial body. It does not seem that Luke simply forgot about the Magi, or that Matthew missed the story of the shepherds. Axiom analyzed the narrative function of both groups. The conclusion is that the two groups could not exist in the same story, because each was created to convey a totally different message. According to Axiom's semantic analysis, the shepherds are a marker for the Jewish audience, a symbol of purity and a connection to King David, who was also a shepherd. They indicate that the Messiah came for his own people. The Magi, on the other hand, are a marker for the non-Jewish Hellenistic audience, a symbol that the wisdom of the pagan world bows before the new truth, and that salvation is destined for all nations. The authors were not describing the same event from different angles. They were constructing two different narratives to serve two distinct theological purposes. And just when it seems the foundation of the canon has been completely demolished, we arrive at the final point of our analysis. We turn to the other two files, to the remaining evangelists. What do they say about Christmas? About Bethlehem? About the miraculous birth? The answer is shocking in its simplicity. They say absolutely nothing. The Gospel of Mark is considered the oldest of the four, written closer to the events it describes. It is our most valuable source. And it begins with the baptism of an already adult Jesus by John the Baptist in the Jordan River. And that is it. Not a word about his birth, no suggestion of a miraculous conception, no census, Bethlehem, star, magi, or shepherds. For Mark, the story begins with an adult man starting his preaching. He calls him Jesus of Nazareth, not of Bethlehem. His origin, for Mark, holds not the slightest importance. And what about John? His gospel is the latest, the most philosophical. It begins with a grandiose prologue about the Word that was with God and became flesh. It seemed like the perfect place for the story of a miraculous birth. But no, John also completely ignores the entire Christmas narrative. Worse, in his text, the characters constantly refer to Jesus as the son of Joseph and question if anything good could come from Nazareth. For John, just as for Mark, Jesus is a man from Nazareth. The connection to Bethlehem, the cornerstone of Matthew and Luke's narratives, simply does not exist for them. Axiom has just processed what we call the silence protocol. The absence of the Christmas story in the oldest and latest texts is a statistically overwhelming fact. The probability that 2 of the 4 main biographers forgot to mention such a monumental event, the basis of faith for billions, is practically zero. This can only mean one thing. Either at the time the first gospel was written, this story did not yet exist, or the authors, for some reason, considered it unimportant or, more likely, false. The source code presents fundamental inconsistencies. But to understand how far from reality this literary construction actually was, it is not enough to merely expose the contradictions in the texts. We need to go further. We need to reconstruct the world in which these events supposedly happened. Initiating the Judea simulation, Axiom received the order to collect and process all available historical, archaeological, and sociological data on first-century Palestine. It created a full-scale digital model of that time and place, without embellishments, without myths, without the varnish of religion. And what this simulation shows is brutal. The Christmas story not only happens in a vacuum, it unfolds on a theater stage, while backstage, a real, violent, and bloody world roars. A world in which the events described by Luke and Matthew would be, quite simply, impossible. Let us now enter Judea as it really was, and understand why the official version of Christmas resembles a symbolic construction more than a literal account. The first and most important parameter of our simulation is the political climate. The Gospels paint us an almost pastoral picture, where a distant emperor issues a decree and everyone obeys docilely. This image contrasts sharply with historical records. First-century Judea was not a peaceful province. It was an occupied territory, a powder keg with the fuse lit. If this analysis is opening your eyes, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Your help is a blessing to us and allows us to continue this investigation. Axiom processed all data regarding the Roman presence in the region, and the image that emerges is unmistakable. A zone of permanent, low-intensity military conflict. It was a land crossed by marching legions, Roman patrols at every crossroads, tax collectors, procurators, and prefects with absolute power, whose word was law. And the main tool of that law was the cross. Crucifixion went far beyond a simple execution, functioning as a political spectacle, a daily reminder to every Jew of who was in charge. The simulation shows that in the years preceding and following the birth of Jesus, the region was shaken by dozens of local revolts and riots, all crushed with exemplary cruelty. After the death of King Herod the Great, the Romans crucified 2,000 rebels in Galilee alone. 2,000. Their bodies were left hanging along the roads, rotting under the scorching sun. It is in this atmosphere that we must analyze the journey of a carpenter and his young pregnant wife. The road from Nazareth to Bethlehem, with its 150 kilometers, was not a tourist route. It crossed Samaria, a territory hostile to Jews, and the Judean desert, infested with thieves, runaway slaves, and zealots, religious fanatics who viewed the murder of a Roman or a collaborator as a sacred duty. Axiom has just concluded the risk analysis for such a trip. The probability of an unprotected couple, with a woman at the end of her pregnancy, completing this route without an armed escort and not becoming victims of robbery, violence, or murder is less than 10%. Sending a pregnant wife on such a journey just to fulfill a formality would be an act of complete madness, almost a death sentence. But perhaps the emperor's decree was so important that it outweighed all risks. The second point of failure arises in the social and economic reality. Luke's story about the census seems simple. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. But Axiom, upon analyzing Roman law and administrative practice, flags this statement as historically implausible. First, the Romans never conducted a census of the entire empire simultaneously. It would be a logistical nightmare. Censuses were local, conducted by province and at different times. Second, and this is the crucial point, the Romans conducted censuses for taxation purposes, registering property and collecting a poll tax. For this, what mattered was where the person lived and worked, not the city of origin of an ancestor from 1,000 years ago. The requirement that everyone go to the city of their ancestors is completely absurd from the point of view of Roman bureaucracy. It would have provoked a mass migration, paralyzed the economy, and provided no useful data for tax collection. This requirement only makes sense in a single context, that of Jewish theology, to artificially move the hero to the correct prophetic city. For a first-century artisan like Joseph, the order would mean financial disaster, abandoning his home, his workshop, and his clients for weeks, perhaps months. Spending all his savings on a dangerous trip, risking the life of his wife and future child, to register in a city where he had never been. Axiom's simulation of economic models is categorical. This would mean complete ruin. It would be a one-way ticket to debt. No sane person would do this, but perhaps the most important parameter of our simulation is the religious consciousness of the Jews of that time. Jewish society was divided, but everyone was united in one thing: a feverish and passionate expectation for the arrival of the Messiah. And this is where the canonical story collapses completely. Axiom analyzed hundreds of texts from that period, from the Dead Sea Scrolls to the writings of Jewish historians. The profile of the expected Messiah was absolutely clear. People were not expecting a humble baby born in obscurity. They yearned for a warrior Messiah, a king. They knew David, who with fire and sword would drive out the Roman legions and restore the kingdom of Israel. Now imagine what the evangelists describe happening in this electrified atmosphere. An unprecedented star appears in the sky. Noble foreigners arrive in the capital and ask Rome's puppet king where the true newborn king is. Angels sing in the heavens, announcing the Savior. According to Axiom's information dissemination analysis, news of such events would spread through Judea like wildfire. It would be a call to arms. Thousands of people, desperate for a sign, would have rushed to Bethlehem to see their liberator king. This would have provoked a mass insurrection which Herod and the Romans would have drowned in blood. But what do we see in the story? Total silence. With the exception of a few shepherds and foreigners, no one seems to have noticed the greatest event in human history. This is not just unlikely, it is impossible. The only explanation for this silence is that these events simply did not happen. The Judea simulation reaches a verdict. The Christmas story fails the test of historical and social plausibility with a probability of 99.9%. It could have happened anywhere, except in the real first-century Judea. The theater stage has collapsed, revealing the harsh reality behind the curtains. The Judea simulation proved that the real world was totally hostile to the docile Christmas story. But the creators of this narrative were brilliant. They anticipated this critique. In the heart of the story, they built an insurmountable wall, a firewall designed to protect the entire construction from any logical attack. This firewall is the miracle, a supernatural event that, by definition, operates outside the laws of physics and history. We are talking about the cornerstone of faith, the biological singularity known as the virgin conception. The message behind this seems to be, do not try to analyze, do not apply your human logic. It is a mystery, an act of divine intervention. But in our work, we accept nothing based on faith. For us, any statement is just a datum that demands verification. We initiated the anomaly protocol, directing all of Axiom's computational power toward this central dogma, dismantling it through biology, linguistics, and comparative mythology. And we will prove that this greatest of miracles is, in fact, the greatest of manipulations, built upon the mistranslation of a single word and the use of an ancient propaganda tool. The first level of analysis is the most obvious, the biological one. Axiom evaluated the probability of parthenogenesis, or virginal reproduction, in the human species. Its answer was instantaneous and categorical. The probability is 0, not 1 in a trillion, an absolute mathematical 0. Human reproduction requires the fusion of 2 genetic sets. Any claim to the contrary violates every law of biology we know. Defenders of the faith would argue that is exactly where the miracle lies. We accept the argument. But this forces us to ask a much more uncomfortable question. On what is the belief in this unique event based, other than the statements of the late texts of Matthew and Luke themselves? This is where we move to the second level of analysis, the linguistic one, and discover the epicenter of the entire construction. Everything relies on a prophecy from the book of Isaiah, chapter 7, verse 14. It is to this verse that the author of Matthew refers to prove that the birth of Jesus from a virgin was predicted 700 years before the event. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. It seems like irrefutable proof, but it only seems so because we are dealing with one of the most impactful mistranslations in history. We loaded the original text of the book of Isaiah in ancient Hebrew into Axiom and ordered a semantic analysis of the keyword. In the original Hebrew text, the word translated as virgin is Alma, and the meaning of Alma is simply young woman, simply a young woman of marriageable age. The word says absolutely nothing about her sexual experience. It describes a social status, not a physiological one. In the ancient Hebrew language, there is a completely different and specific word to designate a virgin in the biological sense, the word betula. If the prophet Isaiah wanted to say that the Messiah would be born of a virgin, he would undoubtedly have used the word betula, but he did not. So how did the young woman transform into a virgin? The anomaly occurred around the 2nd century before the Common Era, when Jewish scholars in Alexandria translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, creating the version known as the Septuagint. It was these translators who encountered the word Alma and decided to translate it with the Greek word Parthenos. A convenient choice because Parthenos was ambiguous. It could mean both girl and virgin. It was a semantic time bomb, and this bomb exploded a century and a half later. The author of the Gospel of Matthew, writing in Greek for a Greek-speaking audience, did not work with the original Hebrew. He read the Septuagint, saw the word Parthenos, and decided to interpret it in its most radical and miraculous sense. He did not make a mistake. He made a conscious ideological choice using the ambiguity of the translation to create a miracle. The entire prophetic basis for the virgin conception crumbles. It is not built on the rock of an ancient prediction, but on the foundation of a linguistic inaccuracy and a theological choice. But why did the authors need this miracle so much? The answer comes from our third level of analysis, comparative mythology. Axiom scanned the global database of religious and mythological texts in search of similar plots. The results are striking. The story of a miraculous birth is not a unique event. It is one of the most common archetypes of the ancient world. It was the standard seal of quality to mark the birth of any exceptional personality. The Egyptian god Horus was conceived by his mother, Isis, while she was a virgin. The Persian god Mithras, whose cult was a major rival to early Christianity, was born of a virgin. Perseus in Greek mythology was born of the virgin Danae. Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome, were born of the Vestal virgin Rhea Silvia. Even real historical figures were wrapped in such legends. It was said that the true father of Alexander the Great was Zeus. The mother of Emperor Augustus claimed he was conceived by the god Apollo. Axiom identifies a clear pattern here, a tool to prove that he was God. In a world where emperors declared themselves gods, the story of a simple birth by a carpenter and his wife would carry no weight. To compete in the marketplace of ideas, the new Messiah needed an origin to match. The story of the virgin birth reveals itself less as a biological report and more as a powerful statement of political and theological marketing, telling the pagan world in a language it understood. Our hero is not inferior to yours. His father is not Joseph of Nazareth, but God himself. The firewall has been breached. The miracle which was supposed to protect the story turned out to be its weakest link. The supernatural and symbolic foundations of the canon have crumbled. But one last column remains, a pillar that seems made not of myth, but of solid historical granite. It is the statement of the evangelist Luke, a specific, bureaucratic, and theoretically verifiable declaration, the decree of Emperor Augustus and the population census conducted by Quirinius, governor of Syria. This sounds like a history book fact. Not a miracle, not a prophecy, but the routine of imperial administration. It is this fact that gives the entire narrative an appearance of credibility. It is the nail on which the whole painting hangs. We will put this nail under Axiom's electron microscope, initiating the census vector. We will dive into the Roman annals, the consular lists, the works of independent historians of the time, and we will analyze this point in detail. We will prove, with mathematical precision, that the census described by Luke is not just an inaccuracy, but a chronological inconsistency that defies the entire official version from within, a historical anachronism that makes his narrative impossible. Revisiting the key lines of the source code for analysis in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Here we have two fundamental data markers. The third marker, equally important, comes from the Gospel of Matthew. The birth of Jesus occurred during the life of King Herod the Great. We have three conditions that must be true at the same time. Herod is still alive, and Quirinius is governing Syria and conducting a census. Now, let us turn off theology and turn on chronology. Axiom has just processed all available data regarding the government of these three historical figures. Let us begin with King Herod. Historical science, based on countless sources, including the writings of Flavius Josephus, dates the death of Herod the Great to the year 4 before the Common Era. This is an established fact, not contested by any serious historian. Therefore, to believe Matthew, Jesus must have been born before the year 4 before the Common Era. Keep that date. Now let us move to Publius Sulpicius Quirinius. He was a real historical figure, a prominent Roman senator and military commander. His career is well documented, and this is where we find the first shock. According to all Roman records and, crucially, the testimony of the same Flavius Josephus, Quirinius was appointed governor of Syria and conducted his famous census in Judea in the year 6 of the Common Era. Note well, it was not before the Common Era, it was after. The magnitude of this temporal catastrophe is difficult to process. Axiom is overlaying the two timelines: death of Herod, year 4, before the Common Era, census of Quirinius, year 6 of the Common Era. Between these two events, there is an abyss of 10 years, a whole decade. Herod had already been dead for 10 years when Quirinius arrived in Syria to conduct his census. The two events not only do not coincide, they belong to different historical eras. The probability of their simultaneous occurrence is 0. This means that the chronology presented in the Gospels proves to be historically inconsistent. Jesus could not have been born in the days of Herod the Great and during the census of Quirinius. It is like saying someone was born during the American Civil War and also during the moon landing. These are mutually exclusive time markers. One of the evangelists, Matthew or Luke, is not telling the truth. And considering that Herod's reign was a much closer and more memorable event for the inhabitants of Judea than the appointment of a distant Roman official, the error was most likely Luke's. But why did he make this mistake? Axiom's analysis of Roman provincial legislation reveals another layer of inconsistencies. The census of Quirinius in the year 6 of the Common Era was not a routine event. It was an occurrence of enormous political importance. It was carried out because in that specific year, Rome finally removed Herod's son Archelaus from power and transformed Judea from a client kingdom into a full Roman province under direct administration. The purpose of the census was to assess all property for the introduction of direct Roman taxation. The event was so traumatic and humiliating for the Jews that it provoked a major revolt led by Judas of Galilee, initiating the Zealot movement. Now, let us return to the time of Herod. Under his reign, Judea was not a province. Herod was a friend and ally king of the Roman people. He had internal autonomy, collected his own taxes, and paid a tribute to Rome. The Romans did not interfere in his fiscal affairs. Axiom's political simulation is clear. An attempt by Rome to conduct a direct census in Herod's territory while he was alive would have been seen as a gross violation of his sovereignty. The paranoid Herod, who executed his own sons on suspicion of conspiracy, would never have tolerated such humiliation. Of course, theologians, seeing this hole in the narrative, tried to invent a solution. Perhaps Quirinius was governor of Syria twice, and Luke was referring to an earlier undocumented census. It is a desperate attempt to invent events to save the text. Axiom performed a full search of every existing database and found absolutely nothing. There is not a single piece of evidence, not even the vaguest, that Quirinius governed Syria before the year 6 of the Common Era. The hypothesis of a first census of Quirinius is classified by the analysis as a statement with 0 degree of verification. It only exists on the pages of Luke's Gospel. The nail has been pulled out. The last historical anchor has crumbled. All the stated motives, all the official explanations, turned out to be a fiction. If everything we were told was a construction, what was the truth? If Mary and Joseph made that dangerous journey not because of a census, not for a prophecy, and not by divine order, then why? What real, urgent, and perhaps terrible motive forced them to leave their home at the most inopportune moment? It seems we have reached a dead end, but in Matthew's narrative, one element remains that until now we have considered part of the myth, the cosmic phenomenon, the mysterious star. What was it really? We stand amidst the ashes of the official version. Textual analysis revealed irreconcilable contradictions. Historical simulation showed that the canonical story is incompatible with the reality of Judea. Linguistics deconstructed the miracle, and chronology turned the census into an absurdity. All the logical and supernatural reasons that should have led the Holy Family to Bethlehem proved to be fictitious. We are in an information vacuum, but one element remains. The most mysterious, the most poetic, and as we will show, the most important, the celestial body that went down in history as the Star of Bethlehem. For 2 millennia, theologians called it a unique miracle, a divine beacon created for the Magi. Scientists, in turn, tried to find a rational astronomical explanation, a comet, a supernova, a rare conjunction of planets. To end this debate, we initiated the star signature protocol. Axiom analyzed not only the astronomical data, but the text of Matthew's Gospel itself, to understand how, according to the original source, this star behaved. And the conclusion is shocking for both sides. It was neither a religious miracle nor a known astronomical phenomenon. It was something else. We begin by eliminating the scientific hypotheses. Axiom processed all celestial catalogues for the period in question. The first hypothesis would be a comet. It is a popular version, but Matthew's text says the Magi saw the star in the east, which implies they traveled west toward Jerusalem. Furthermore, and most importantly, a comet moves across the sky. It cannot stop over a specific location. Axiom classifies the hypothesis as incompatible with the description. The second possibility would be a supernova, the explosion of a star. This would explain a fixed point of light, but a supernova is a grandiose event, visible to everyone. It would have been recorded by astronomers from Rome to China. Axiom scoured all historical records of the time. The result was absolute silence. Furthermore, like any star, it would participate in the daily rotation of the sky, unable to actively guide a journey and point to a specific house. The scientist's favorite theory is the conjunction of planets. In the year 7 before the Common Era, a rare triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn occurred. For Babylonian astrologers, it would be a powerful sign. Jupiter is the royal planet, Saturn the protector of the Jews, a conjunction indicating the birth of a new king. It seems convincing, but the details in the text again spoil the theory. How could a conjunction of planets go ahead of them? And how did it stop over the house? Planets follow a rigid and predictable path. They do not change trajectory to point to a building. Axiom's analysis is conclusive. No known celestial phenomenon behaves like the star described by Matthew. It appeared and disappeared. It led travelers. It performed precise positioning over a terrestrial target. This is not the description of an astronomical body. It is the description of a guided object. Matthew's text, read as a report, describes a trajectory that corresponds to a flying object, luminous and intelligently controlled. If the star was not an astronomical phenomenon, but a navigation system, then who were its operators? This brings us to the Magi. Our culture transformed them into the three wise men, but that is late folklore. The original text mentions no names, number, or royalty. It uses only one Greek word, magoi, magi. We initiated the Magi Marker Protocol. Who were they? The word magi was the designation for members of the priestly caste of Persia, the religious and intellectual heart of the Parthian Empire, Rome's main geopolitical rival. They were not wandering astrologers. They were the elite of the elite, advisors to kings, scientists, and holders of royal power. Axiom simulated the geopolitical scenario. Rome and Parthia were in a cold war. Judea, governed by Rome's puppet, Herod, was the border zone. A delegation of such politically important figures crossing enemy territory would be an international incident, and they did not hide. They went straight to the capital, Jerusalem, to Herod's palace. And there, they asked the most explosive question imaginable. Where is the newborn king of the Jews? This is not a question, it is an act of political war. In front of the king appointed by Rome, they openly declare that they are looking for an alternative king, a true king. Axiom's simulation regarding the political consequences is clear. The only logical reaction from the paranoid Herod would be to arrest, torture, and execute these men as spies and instigators of a rebellion. But Matthew tells us that Herod let them go, asking them to return to tell him where the child was. This type of behavior is so unlikely, both psychologically and politically, that the entire scene seems like literary fiction. So what was their true mission? It was not worship. It was an intelligence operation. The Persian prophecies of the Magi spoke of a future savior, a Saoshyant, who would be born to lead the final battle of good against evil. They were not looking for the Jewish Messiah. They were looking for the incarnation of their own prophecy on foreign soil. It was an operation to find and perhaps control a figure they considered their own, an extraction mission. The nativity scene dissolves, revealing the contours of a special operation guided by unknown technology in the heart of enemy territory. But what did they find? And where exactly? We need to go to the epicenter. We need to analyze what Bethlehem truly was. The investigation led us through a minefield of contradictions, anachronisms, and impossibilities. We followed a star that was not a star and identified Magi who were, in fact, agents of a foreign power. All the threads of our investigation now converge on a single point on the map, the small town in Judea, whose name became synonymous with miracles, Bethlehem. But what do we really know about this place? Our minds are filled with an immutable image, a wooden stable, a manger full of hay, an ox and a donkey warming a newborn with their breath. This image is engraved in our culture. We initiated the Bethlehem Epicenter Protocol, and the reality is harsh. Forget everything you know. This image is a cultural idealization. Axiom performed a complete textual and archaeological analysis of the birth scene. The conclusion is staggering. There is no stable, no farm animals, not even an inn in the sense we imagine in the original texts. Let us tear apart this cozy setting to show what it hides. Let us begin with the source of all this iconography, the Gospel of Luke. He mentions that Mary placed the baby in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Two keywords. The original Greek word translated as inn is kataluma. Axiom's linguistic module confirms that kataluma never meant a commercial inn. The word for that was pandokeon, which Luke himself uses elsewhere in his Gospel. Kataluma means guest room, the upper room in a common family house. The difference changes everything. Joseph and Mary were not turned away by a wicked innkeeper. They went to the home of relatives in Bethlehem, as was the custom. But since the house was full, the guest room was already occupied. They were not left without shelter. Simply there was no space in the visitors' area. Where did they stay? The archaeology of first-century Palestinian houses gives us the answer. The typical house had an upper level for the family and guests, the kataluma, and a lower level, often a cave or a room at ground level, where the family's animals were kept at night. It was not a separate stable, but part of the main living space. The real scene was one of overcrowding, poverty and chaos, with a newborn lying in a manger, which was nothing more than a stone trough carved into the floor or wall. This was Luke's version. Now, open Matthew's file. Where does he say the Magi found the boy? On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary. In a house, Axiom warns of a critical divergence. Luke describes a birth in improvised and emergency conditions. Matthew describes a visit to a normal house, perhaps up to 2 years later. The two scenes are incompatible. The traditional nativity scene, with shepherds and magi together, is what the analysis defines as a composite fiction. But if we discard the scenes, what remains is the city. Bethlehem, why, yes, it was the city of David. But there was another meaning, a darker one. Axiom's analysis reveals that ancient Jewish texts indicate that the fields around Bethlehem were the place where sacrificial lambs for the temple in Jerusalem were raised and selected. Bethlehem was the place where the lambs destined to atone for the sins of Israel were born. It is to this place, saturated with symbolism of royalty and sacrifice, that the Persian Magi are guided. And this leads us to the final act of the drama, Herod's order, the massacre of all the boys in Bethlehem. The act of absolute evil that should have left a bloody scar on a people's memory. We initiated the silence protocol. Axiom scoured all historical sources from the time not linked to the Bible. We focused on the historian Flavius Josephus, who hated Herod and meticulously listed all his crimes, from the murder of his wife to the execution of his own sons. Axiom searched for a single mention of the massacre of children. The result was absolute silence. The probability that such a monstrous event occurred, yet the greatest chronicler of Herod's crimes forgot to mention it, is 0. The analysis concludes with 99.9% certainty. No historical source from the time outside the Gospel mentions the massacre of the innocents. It was a literary invention by Matthew with a clear purpose, to create a direct parallel between Jesus and Moses, whose origin story involves a pharaoh massacring Hebrew babies. It is a theological rewrite, and if the massacre did not happen, the flight to Egypt, the persecution and the return are also part of the fiction. What are we left with? A man from Nazareth, a family story about a difficult birth in a cave near Bethlehem, perhaps during a pilgrimage. Decades later, his followers face a narrative challenge. Their Messiah has the wrong biography, and thus begins the great process of myth-building. To prove his royal lineage, 2 conflicting genealogies are invented. To place him in Bethlehem, Luke invents an anachronistic census, and Matthew, an original residence that requires a fictitious flight. To prove his divinity, the trope of the virgin birth is inserted. To show his universal appeal, Luke adds Jewish shepherds and Matthew, pagan magi. Human history, simple and raw, was buried under layers of a grandiose myth. But why? What was the final goal? The story of Christmas reveals itself, therefore, less as a report of events and more as a perfectly designed ideological capsule, a cultural code with a purpose, to transform civilization. Its modules are genius: universality, shepherds and magi, poor and rich, Jews and Gentiles. The message is for everyone. Inversion of values. A king is born in a trough. Power lies in weakness. A direct attack on the Roman cult of strength and status. Personalization of the divine. God is not in a state temple, but in a family. Faith becomes intimate. What we discovered in the end has 2 sides. The story of Christmas is, in its details, a construction, but this construction became the most powerful tool of social and spiritual engineering in the history of humanity. It gave a voice to the voiceless and created a new moral universe in which we still live. If you liked this investigation, Subscribing to the channel helps us expand the Axiom investigation project. We would love to read your thoughts on the video's subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for staying with us until the end.